In this video, I'm going to talk about artboards in Illustrator, a brief introduction of what they are, how you can use them, and some different things that they can do. This is part of setting up your files correctly in Illustrator, so it's a really important thing to get right. So let's dive in. In Illustrator, you have what's called your canvas, which is this larger square that you're allowed to work within. If you try to bring in any elements that are larger than the canvas, you won't be able to. And then these individual little working units within the canvas are called artboards. And to me, the name canvas works better for the artboards than for the larger piece. But the canvas is your whole piece, and your artboards are your individual kind of design elements, pieces. If you are doing like an invitation suite like this, each one would be a different page. If you are designing a bunch of different elements, each one would typically have a different element on it. Your design has to have at least one artboard in it. You can't delete all of the artboards, but you really don't have to design on the artboards at all if you don't want to. You can do anything that you can do on the artboards, off the artboards as well. And then depending on the file type, you can even save this out as a JPEG or a PNG without even using the artboards at all. So if I just wanted to use this pink square and everything else as part of my design, then I could save all of it together as a single JPEG, for instance, without even bothering with the artboards. Since I design wedding invitations, I like to think of the artboards as each individual page of the suite. And then, for instance, like with this blue rehearsal dinner invite, this first artboard is the first page, and then this is the back of what will be printed on the back here. When you're saving out as like a JPEG or a PNG, you can use the artboards. So it will save each one as an individual JPEG, or you can ignore the artboards, in which case you basically get this whole thing as if it was one design saved out. When you're saving as a PDF, for instance, you are going to have each artboard as its own individual page. So how do you set these up in the first place? When you go into a new file, you'll see kind of your recent items, and you can save templates and things. I honestly don't use a lot of templates, but they do have free ones. They have some common sizes that you might need for like art and illustration, like a postcard or poster size, or you can make your own. I use this 5x7 enough that it's always in my recent items, so it basically serves as a template. And if I click on this 5x7, it's going to create a document with one artboard that is 5x7 inches. If I wanted to add more artboards to it, then I would go over here to this artboard tool or press Shift O. And then with that, I can move this one. I can resize it. And I can also add additional ones just by clicking here or drawing. And then you can use these tools at the top to resize. You can use this one to change the orientation, but keep the same size, etc. I really like that you can move your artboards around a lot. For instance, when I'm designing invitations, it's nice that I can just pull the envelope over here, move this details card over here, move things around, and play with them as I like. You can have as many artboards on your canvas as you want, as long as they don't extend the bounds of the canvas. And you can make them different sizes as well as different orientations. However, all artboards are rectangle or square. If you wanted to have a document with multiple artboards, you can set that up here as well. So we can say 5x7 inches, and we can say 10 artboards. In more settings down here at the bottom, you can actually change like the spacing between artboards and how they are numbered. So if you prefer for them to grid by column or by row, or just to be all in one row or all in one column, you can absolutely do that. You can change the number of columns. So if I'm designing a seating chart with 20 pages, for instance, I'm going to set it up so it's got the correct number of columns and rows. Each artboard is going to represent like an individual one of those 20 tables. One last thing that you might see is bleed. I have some other videos on this. You can set the bleed here. Most printers are going to require a 0.125 inch bleed on all four sides. Typically, you do want these to be the same on all sides, but if you don't want to, you can unclick this link here. And what the bleed is this red line out on the side. So if you turn bleed off, you wouldn't see this red line. Any elements that bleed over the edge of the page need to go at least to that red line or further, so that when people are printing it, they have a little extra to work with in case the cut shifts after they print it. So if I have anything that goes to the edge of the paper, I actually want to extend it at least as far as that red line or further. Again, we have some other videos on that if you're not familiar with bleed. One thing that I've set up is the most common artboards that I use. You can't create a template that has multiple sizes and shapes of artboards in it. So what I've done is just create a document. That's my Blake invitation suite. It has all the pieces that I typically use. These two are envelopes, invitation, details card, RSVP card, RSVP envelope, and envelope liner. I also put sample text on here because that's really helpful to me, and this is a setup that I use often. So I created a file called Blank Invitation Suite, and I open it and resave it as the new file every time I'm working on a new suite. That's a way to just have all my artboards ready to go. Now, if you want to change the color of your canvas or anything, you can go into Edit Preferences and check out the User Interface section. So you can change to like lighter or dark modes. You can actually change the full canvas color to white if you prefer that. I prefer it to be matching the brightness level that I use. One thing that's important for me while designing is to see what will be cut off on the page. And I often have the elements like this that are going off the page, and sometimes it's just hard to picture exactly what it's going to look like. So if I use the view, I really like this trim view. It cuts everything to the size of the artboard, not the size of the bleed. This is exactly what everything's going to look like when it is printed at the exact size. And I really like using this trim view when I'm designing to cut off everything that's not on an artboard. I also like to make myself notes outside of the artboards because I know I'm only going to save my files as each artboard being in an individual page. So if I make a note to myself, for instance, print on double thick stock, then I can just put it outside of the artboards and I know it's not going to print. When you click the artboard tool, you'll see that every artboard has this number and they're numbered in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you want to reorder your artboards, you can always go into your artboards window over here and you can reorder them. So you can see that this design has kind of been an amalgamation of different artboards. So we actually have artboard 1, artboard 2, number 3 was actually artboard 6 at some point, but now it's number 3 because we've added and deleted things in this design. So we can see the order of these. We can reorder them if we would like. For instance, if it's easier to save a file like these two being front and back, it's easier to have those together and they weren't, we could always reorder them however we want. And you can also rename them here. So artboard 1 is the liner, for instance, and you'll be able to see that name over here. Artboard 2 is the invite, and so on and so forth. If you do export your artboards as a JPEG, for instance, then these names will come with it. So that can be really helpful if you need to upload them in a certain way or need to be able to see in the file names which piece is which piece. You can rename the artboards in that way. Otherwise, they will just be listed as the file name and then artboard 1, 2, 3, etc. So lastly, I'll show you how to kind of export these things. So if you did a save as, then you could decide how you want to save it. Most of the time, we're going to do a PDF in this particular case. Use artboards is automatically checked. You can't choose to not use artboards on PDFs, but you can choose a range of artboards or to use all of them. So if I want all the pieces in this PDF, great. If I only want, for instance, those rehearsal dinner invites, I can put 6 and 7, save. I can choose whatever options I want here, including like trim marks, bleed marks, just all kinds of different things here. And then when it saves, you can see we only saved artboard 6 and artboard 7. If you want to save them out as JPEGs or something, you will use the export feature, export as. And then in this case, you can either check use artboards or not. I'm going to do both just to show you what it looks like. So let's do it without use artboards, and you can choose a few options here. And then I will do it with the artboards. So we'll click use artboards and we'll do all of them. Now when we chose to not use artboards, you can see it included basically everything that is on the entire canvas, including our little note we made outside of the artboards to print on double thick. So you can do a JPEG of the full canvas. Technically, you don't even have to use the artboards at all if you don't want to. But then what you'll see when we chose to use the artboards is each one saved out as an individual JPEG of that specific artboard. And you can see here we have Artboards, which is the name of our Illustrator file. And we had renamed boards 1 and 2 as Invite and Liner. So those have those names there. And then the rest that we didn't rename just kept that artboard number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as an invitation designer, I work in pages. So I always just think of artboards as individual pages. You could think of them as individual canvases within this larger canvas. You could think of them as individual elements if you're designing specific elements in Adobe Illustrator. There's a lot of different ways you can think of these, but each one is going to be able to be separated or saved out as an individual file. So that's really how you want to separate these things, as anything that you want to save as an individual file should be on its own artboard. So for such a simple concept, I feel like we covered kind of a lot. This was a really deep dive on artboards. I have a larger course that's free just for getting started in Adobe Illustrator. If you want to check that out, I'm going to link it in the description for you. And while you're here, I hope you'll watch some of our other videos about graphic design, Adobe Illustrator, stationery design specifically. And let me know what questions you have or videos you would like to see. Thank you.